Well, you mentioned that it's a great part of the Indian tradition. I would say that not only that, it's a massive part of the yoga tradition. So you know that there are six classical darshanas, and Sankhya and yoga have always been paired together as being related as part of those six. And Sankhya and yoga have always been very, very closely related. Uh, But nowadays, Sankhya has been written out of the equation as yoga's taken over. I kind of like to think of Sankhya is the forgotten ugly sister, as yoga's been the starlet and has gone out and taken the limelight. But they're so close, they're almost like twins. And from my perspective, you can't really understand yoga philosophy unless you include Sankhya as part and parcel of that. Uh, so you asked me to explain a little bit about what Sankhya is. The word Sankhya means, it literally means calculation or enumeration, or it's just like a number of something. And in the Sankhya system, what they did was they looked into their experience of reality and they basically just counted out what they saw. They laid out the contents of their experience. So they basically said, I see this, and I see this, and I see this, and I see this. But what they did was they went from kind of more gross states of consciousness. And as they refined their meditative awareness, they would become aware of more subtle substrates of reality. And they would keep getting increasingly subtle until they came to kind of a crux point where they were in their meditations, they would be able to distinguish between kind of who they thought they were and who they actually were. So for me, the process of Sankhya is a deep process of introspection. And they have a map of all the things that they would have been discovered through the process of their meditations. That's how I see it. It's a systematized organization of the insights that came from practice. So these insights into the nature reality would have come probably from meditative practices. Mm-hmm. So rather than it being, sometimes it's characterized as a purely intellectual system, but that's usually an argument made to dismiss it in comparison to yoga, which is solely based on practice. But I think this, to use big words, ontological schema of reality came from meditational insights and wasn't just made up out of the blue by some imaginative fellow. Well, Sankhya is a dualistic philosophy. So it proposes that basically, kind of in contrast to, say, Vedanta, which says there's only one thing, which is Brahman, and that's the totality of everything, except, usually we're in illusion when we think that there's more than one thing. In Sankhya, it posits two basic constituents of reality, which it calls Purusha, which is consciousness, and Prakriti, which is material nature. And so it's hypothesized that Prakriti exists in a primordial state until it's disturbed by the presence of Purusha. And within this disturbance, Prakriti begins to evolve and it begins to form the material reality that we see before us. So Prakriti itself is said to be made of 3 strands, which a lot of people will be familiar with. They're called the gunas, which are sattva, rajas, and tamas. And so it's hypothesized that before their disturbance by the presence of Purusha, they exist in a primordial state. But then they're awakened up by the presence of consciousness, and they begin to fluctuate. I imagine them as waveforms. And as they do so, as they fluctuate, they evolve the material universe. So the first substrate of the first evolute of Prakriti would be called Buddhi. And this is the most sattvic, the most pure substance, the most pure material substance. And it's Buddhi translates as understanding, intelligence. It's kind of the synonym of pure clarity. And then following on from Buddhi, a little less subtle, would be Ahamkara, which is the Ahamkara literally means, well, Aham in Sanskrit means I. Ahamkara means the I maker. So the first is Buddhi, then comes the ego, which we call Ahamkara, and then followed by that is Manas, which we can translate as mind, what we would take as our everyday mind. So these 3 together form Chitta. And Chitta is what the Yoga Sutras would call mind. Although in the Yoga Sutras, it doesn't really define what Chitta means. It doesn't really define what mind means. We have to go to the Sankhya philosophy in order to understand what the Yoga Sutras mean by Chitta.
So let me just recap. So
yes.
As Prakriti is kind of stepping down into material form from its primordial state, it first becomes intelligence, just pure intelligence.
Yeah.
And then it becomes like a sense of self, a separate sense of self.
Yes.
And then it becomes consciousness or mind.
I would say something like that, yeah. So you see what happens. The ahamkara is a pivotal point because the attention goes outwards. So anything that follows after ahamkara gets attached to ahamkara. It gets identified with this I self. So the mind, I guess you'd say thoughts or that come from within manas, the ahamkara attaches to those as mine. Whereas that's not quite yet happening in the buddhi. The buddhi is pure, I guess what we would call conscious awareness. Mm-hmm. And then the ahamkara is the I thought, and then the manas is the mind, and the ahamkara latches on to anything that follows after it in terms of the evolution and identifies with it.
Okay.
And then the evolution continues, and you'll have different senses will evolve, and the different capacities for sensing, and then the very thing that the world is made up of, earth, ether, water, fire, and space. And so this will take account of the whole of the material universe.
And so this is an explanation of how the universe came into being, in a way, or how it comes into being. Is this something that's happening according to Sāṃkhya? Is this something that's happening moment to moment, or is this what has happened over evolution's history?
Well, I see it actually as something quite different. I think it can be seen as a cosmological description of the universe, but really what I think is being described is the experiential awareness of somebody who's going deep within themselves and is reporting back. So at the very outer level of experience, they have an experience of this concrete reality made up of the various elements. But as they drop deeper within that, they'll see that this material reality made up of elements itself is coming from somewhere else. And as they drop deeper inside that, they'll see that it's like a Russian doll. And as they open up the dolls, they get closer to the revelation of their true identity.
So you've got to go backwards.
You've got to go backwards. That's exactly how I think both Sankhya and yoga are describing it. So the word in yoga is pratiprasavaha, which literally means reversal of the flow. Mm-hmm. Because the flow from ahamkara has up to now been outwards, and both yoga and Sankhya start off with the premise that this in our lives has caused us nothing but suffering. And if we want to not suffer anymore, we need to understand who we truly are. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do that is to stop our outward focus of attention and to bring it into inner space, to go backwards and answer that time-honored question, who am I?